Hey folks, I'm sure by now you've heard about the White House issuing an executive order directing the Department of Defense and the Department of Justice to coordinate with local law enforcement in deploying national security assets, personnel, training, and non-lethal capacities to assist crime prevention. It sets a 90-day clock to finalize those arrangements. It's not a crime policy. It's the soft launch of domestic militarization. It's the quiet normalization of embedding the Pentagon in your local police force, not in response to a disaster, not under a declaration of emergency, but a matter of everyday internal governance. It's not about the border. It's not about cartels, not about MS-13. It's not even about protest yet. It's about building the legal and logistical structure for this president to use the armed power of the federal government inside the United States against the United States and to call it something else. It's not new. It's just the next chapter, because the legal foundation for this kind of power grab was signed into law in 1807 by your Thomas Jefferson. The same Jefferson who warned about standing armies with the rest of his patriot buddies and his centralized power when he wrote his notes on the state of Virginia. And then he cloaked himself in the language of liberty at every opportunity. That Jefferson, that scared Jefferson, frightened of Aaron Burr, signed the Insurrection Act, which granted the president broad discretion to use federal troops inside the country to suppress insurrection or enforce law without a declaration of law, and crucially, without the consent of a state's governor, if federal law was considered endangered. And it keeps what an insurrection is very vague. So that immediate context was the so-called Burr conspiracy, Burr causing all kinds of interesting trouble in early America. Jefferson believed that Burr, who had been his former vice president and killed Alexander Hamilton, was planning an expedition to seize Spanish territory, or perhaps even carve out an independent state in the Mississippi Valley. He was tried for treason. He was acquitted, represented by Edmund Randolph, by the way, in front of John Marshall. Anyway, well, the actual threat was ambiguous, and it fizzled almost as soon as it was confronted. Jefferson acted quickly, ordering the military to intercept Burr's associates. That move relied on the Militia Acts of 1792, but Jefferson's administration pushed for more permanent legal clarity. Congress obliged, and on March 3rd, 1807, Jefferson's final full day in office, he signed the Insurrection Act. What a legacy. That one's not on his tombstone. Drafter of the Declaration of Independence, the Declaration of the Rights of Religious Freedom, and signer of the Insurrection Act. He never invoked it. He was out of office, but it didn't matter. The damage was already done. The act gave the president a tool that future administrations would use to project federal force inside civilian life. It's been invoked to enforce school desegregation. Yay, Little Rock in 1957 by Eisenhower. Oxford, Mississippi in 1962, JFK. JFK again, Tuscaloosa in 1963 for the same purpose. To suppress urban rebellion, for those of us who remember the LA riots in 1992. And more recently, it nearly resurfaced again in June 2020, when this guy's advisors debated using it to respond to the racial justice protests. It wasn't written to protect democracy. It was written to defend federal authority. It was written to defend power. And over the years, that meant whatever the president says it means. And it's a pattern. Every time American elites feel their grip on power, or those in charge feel their grip on power start to loosen, they reach not for liberty, but for law. Law that authorizes force, law that silences dissent, law that recasts protest as threat. John Adams, another of our patriots, signed the Alien and Sedition Acts in 1798. We've talked about this. Those laws gave the federal government the power to criminalize opposition to its authority, deport immigrants, and target those who spoke out against the regime. And as we know, the Alien Enemies Act remains in force today. It's been cited in federal court cases as recently as this week and is the only portion of Adams' sedition regime never repealed. Trump's already turned to it, and nothing is going to stop them from continuing to do so. So Jefferson's Insurrection Act, Adams' Alien Enemies Act are not artifacts of the past. They are tools of the now. And these men didn't betray American principles when they signed these laws. They didn't betray the American Revolution signing these laws. They clarified them, and they showed again and again that liberty was negotiable so long as power wasn't. And this didn't start with them either. As we've been talking about, when Daniel Shays and hundreds of fellow veterans and farmers rose up in western Massachusetts in the late summer of 1786, they weren't threatening the new nation. They weren't threatening the government of Massachusetts. They were demanding it live up to its promises. The courts were seizing their land, the taxes were crushing them, and the debt they carried had been born of service to the Revolutionary War that seems that they had left them behind. So much for no taxation without representation, huh? They were resisting the same tradition their new government claimed to uphold. But folks hungry for power like Alexander Hamilton and James Madison, see a trend here, saw something different. They saw at least the makings of a rhetorical crisis, something they could spin into a crisis. Because no one was clamoring for a new federal constitution in 1786. The public mood did not demand more centralized authority. Hamilton and Madison manufactured the panic. They exaggerated Shays' rebellion as proof of anarchy, and they used that fear to justify calling the Constitutional Convention in 1787. Madison would later cite the rebellion explicitly in the Federalist Papers, particularly number 10, warning of popular insurrections and instability as threats to the Republic. There's just the one, and it was hardly that. The Constitution that resulted gave them exactly what they wanted: centralized federal power, a strong executive, a standing army, and provisions to suppress domestic unrest. It was not a response to democratic demands. It was a reaction to them. So when Jefferson signed the Insurrection Act in 1807, he wasn't breaking with America's founding trajectory. He was perpetuating it. He was fulfilling it. And so what this regime is doing now is not the return of martial law. It's the final stage of something much older, the embedding of military force into the daily operations of American government. You don't need a tank in the streets when you have a federalized police force trained by the Pentagon, coordinated by the DOJ, and armed under a memo signed in peacetime. You don't need to declare war when you're already redefining resistance as crime. And that's where we are. A 90-day clock's been set. Military and national security assets will be integrated into domestic jurisdictions. They won't call it martial law. They'll call it prevention, order, safety. But it's built on that same logic that has always guided American power. Fear of the people, fear of dissent, fear of any movement that threatens the illusion that the founding was righteous and complete. History didn't just warn us, it laid the track. We just didn't stop the train. And now it's arriving right on schedule, right in time for the 250th. Seems like a nice round number to end it all, huh?